Welcome to TishTalk with Tish Conlon. Let's talk health, healing, politics and geopolitics, history, spirituality, money, finance, world news, science, technology, conspiracies. Let's talk. Dish talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tish Talk. I'm really delighted tonight to share the story of Vincent Gircys. Some of you know him, some of you may not, but very inspirational. And I think this is the sort of civic action we need to restore freedom in our country in Canada. Vincent is going to do a little more of an intro, but for those of you who don't know him, he was a 32-year serving as a police officer. And he's also known very widely across Canada for supporting Police for Freedom, as well as being involved in the very controversial project and fight to protect Constable Helen Grus, who identified a high number of infant deaths following the COVID injections. And for that, she was not held up as a hero as she should have been for speaking the truth and protecting children, but she was actually disciplined. And this discipline action is ongoing, and she does need your support as well. Protecting our freedoms takes action. Peaceful civic action, and I think Vincent exemplifies that, and I'm very honored and privileged to have him as a guest tonight. So welcome, Vincent. How are you tonight?
Very good. Thank you for having me on this episode.
Well, my pleasure. And I wanted to ask you to start. Many people might be wondering, you served 32 years as a constable. Many people would have just retired, gone off on vacations and whatever. What called you so deeply to stand up and, to step forward because of what's been happening with the politicization of our police force?
Well, during the beginning of the COVID era is the time that I started asking a lot of questions. I've certainly been fully updated on all of my vaccines as required and or just through personal choice. However, when the COVID era came along, the entire news cycle associated with a so-called pandemic was quite riveting, and really wanted to be ahead of the game. So I did a lot of research to ensure that I and my family was most protected beyond anything else that I could possibly do. And the more research I did, right from the early stages of the onset, I found that what I was researching, factual information associated to this, and what I was hearing on the media was really in conflict. And a lot of it came from just the simple act of wearing a mask. I was very pro-mask at the beginning. And the more research I did, you have to do your own homework. And I'm used to preparing forensic reports. I spent time with the OPP as a forensic investigator, and I know what it's like to prepare forensic reports. I know what it's like to testify as an expert witness, and that I have to be able to prove what I'm saying. So I looked for objective information and evidence, and I started seeing a lot of untruths that were being told, specifically to how we are supposed to live our lives during this period. And the knowledge that I have relative to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I started my career in 1982, and that's the year that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms took place. So I'm very, very aware of rights and freedoms that we have in this country as a result of our charter and our Constitution. And I understand very carefully how lightly we need to tread on those rights. And the fact that we really can't tread on those rights, but sometimes it happens from a policing perspective and the consequences of what happens. And with the rollout of the entire pandemic since 2020, I saw that the government was going in a very authoritative direction that was inconsistent with the evidence that I was made aware of, that came to my attention. And I was quite outspoken about that. And as a result, I have to say, as time went on over the years, the evidence continued to support our observations and the decisions that we made, that I made and others that I know made with respect to these violations against our rights and our freedoms, and just how abusive this relationship became between our government and people that just wanted to be left alone to make their own decisions, including personal bodily autonomy. So as time went on, I became very involved in being outspoken. And then beyond that, all of the evidence that has come out since is very damaging to the government. And
Yes.
I've been involved in a number of groups with a number of groups and people trying to bring awareness to the public, to speak out against the actions of our government, to show with objective evidence that our government was actually misleading the population, that our media is extremely propagandized against the population. And in as little time as just 2 days ago, I mean, I've taken to social media and I do post quite a bit on informative information. And I received a response to a post I put out on Twitter about 2 days ago that I thought was quite interesting. So I had posted something about the fact that information was provided to police services across Canada about what had taken place over the last 5 years, and that they had chosen to not only ignore the evidence that was given to them, but in the case of information that Regina Watil had provided in statistical information, yes, she was able to determine fraud that had taken place, and she had written a book called
Yes.
Fraud. I have a copy of it right here.
Excellent book. I had her as a guest, and I know she was a fellow PPC candidate. She's done some brilliant work, really.
Right. So, Regina had told a story about how she had uncovered frauds and reported that to various ethics agencies associated to the University of Toronto, including reporting this fraud to my former employer, the Ontario Provincial Police, and how she was brushed off and that they didn't want to accept the evidence that she had to present. So just tracking back to my social media context a few days ago, I had posted about this on social media, and I had received many replies that were very positive and understanding. But I received one reply from a user, doesn't go by his real name, but I believe it was TPS_35, something like that, indicating that we're all a bunch of crackpots and we should get with the program, and that we all know that the vaccines were safe and effective. And I have to say, I did make a response to that individual. It was quite troubling to find that we have people who have retired from law enforcement and that are in law enforcement that would make comments like this, that clearly have absorbed the content of their television screen through CBC, CTV, propagandized reporting, and unfortunately haven't taken the time to listen to the evidence provided on the other side of the story. And
no.
So I had extended an invitation for this individual to join me on my own podcast called Deprived Justice, and that we could have this conversation in front of the public, and I would gladly share the information that this individual's not aware of or intentionally doesn't want to know. It's very disturbing to find out that we actually have people in law enforcement, in the law enforcement community, that still don't understand that they're being propagandized.
Yeah. And you bring up a couple of really interesting points. And, you know, a lot of us who've been active sort of on the front lines talking to people about these injustices have come up against that type of mindset. You know, there's a book written called The Indoctrinated Brain, which also discusses how the injections have affected the hippocampus, and whether that's scientifically true or not, but certainly even psychologically, decades and decades of brainwashing, safe and effective, take your vaccine, take your shot, your government is your friend, it's very hard for certain people to let go of that, and some never will. And even 5 years later, to hear someone say that is something we all still experience. Family members who we didn't want to have dinner with us because we didn't take the shot still feel the same way. So it's a very slow process, although the US is making some really good strides on reducing the number of overall shots, because I think it's been clear that there never really was a safety study. So this is really all very positive. But I wanted to ask you something deeper about the police in general in Canada, because people have been concerned for a number of years. The police weren't really standing with the people, and they're supposed to. And anyone who went to the Freedom Convoy saw, the people who were flown in. Maybe they weren't police officers, OPP there, but there was huge aggression against civilians, peaceful protesters. Has the police force been hijacked with a political agenda that that they're required to follow instead of the duty of law? And are certain police officers, or a number of them, waking up and standing against this agenda, which goes against the people they're supposed to support and the law they're supposed to uphold?
That's a two-part question. So let me just unpack the answer to that by basically saying that the police services across this country, they're comprised of a lot of people within the police services. Their ranks are quite large, and they're very
How large?
busy.
How many people?
We probably have 70,000 police officers across Canada right now, in all services. And I don't think this is a problem. We're not really looking at some type of a hostile takeover by 70,000 serving members. But I can certainly say that in a number of larger police services, there's no question that the leadership within these organizations is politically compromised. And that'll bring me to something else I'd like to discuss on the Grus Justice Project about Detective Helen Grus. But you've got the vast majority of the members are in the constable rank, constable, and the uniform rank, which comprises everything under the rank of inspector. You have staff sergeants, sergeants, and constables, and they're the frontline services that are doing the job, and they're very, very busy. They're just inundated with calls. The numbers are dropping. And police services across Canada are panicking and trying everything they possibly can to increase recruitment numbers, and they're really struggling to do that. And I suspect I know why. I believe it's because of what we've witnessed over the last 5 years, that people are really avoiding careers in policing, because they can see that policing, the service itself, has become politicized. And that happens from leadership at the top of some of these organizations. I'm not painting everyone with the same brush, and I don't believe this affects every police service, because I'm not aware of what goes on in every police service. But I can certainly say the major services that I am aware of are certainly problematic. And it's this insidious relationship between politics and the leadership. And then, of course, orders come from the top down. There was something that was discovered recently in the last few weeks that occurred in the United Kingdom, referred to as Project Tala, and the information on Project Tala that had come out indicated that back in the beginning of COVID, the chief constable in the UK, who is their head of policing in all of the UK, had issued a directive titled Project Tala. And in Project Tala, they very clearly stated that no officer is to accept or obtain any information from the public about the COVID-19 pandemic, any portion of that. They're not to accept any information from the public or take any complaints in relation to that. And in the UK, they have a specific criminal violation, and I think it was initiated in around 2018, if I'm not mistaken, that it is a criminal offense for officers in the UK not to document the complaint of a crime.
Wow.
So they take that very seriously in reporting crime. Yet here, the chief officer in charge of all policing issues a stand-down order to all policing across the UK that if anybody, any civilian, makes a complaint about anything to do with COVID-19, don't accept the information. And we're seeing, although we don't have evidence yet of that order having been given in Canada, we see that police services actually behaved in that manner over that time frame. The same thing happened where a number of people from the public tried to serve documents and provide information in detail to police services.
I was one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because health services were not helping and were not cooperative and not having any counter discussions other than this posted propagandized pathway in this dominant narrative that we experienced over about a 3-year period, and where there was a substantial amount of evidence that was conflicting with evidence capture, PCR testing, mask wearing, coercion into vaccination, uninformed consent. I mean, there's a whole series of extortion and extortion related crimes that took place, including fraudulent reporting within the medical community of caseloads. And the government apparently relied on this fraudulent documentation and information. And a lot of the information that the government was putting out was just a lie. I mean, even the travel mandate issue was very obvious that it was even the health agencies in Canada were not recommending travel restrictions. So meanwhile, we as citizens took the lion's share of the brunt of this tyrannical behavior.
Absolutely. And even like very extreme cases remain, untouched, like the Shermans, the Apotex founders who had off-label treatments for COVID with hydroxychloroquine. And, not only were they murdered, but then the plant blew up. And there's been really no investigation that I'm aware of into that, because, they kept pushing, there's only one path. Whereas now we know there was so many paths for treatment. Even vitamin D was primary, just low pennies on the sense most people with proper vitamin D levels could overcome COVID. And there was a study out of Indonesia that said 80% of the COVID deaths, they had huge vitamin D deficiency. So yeah, we know there was massive fraud. We know that the police force has been more and more politicized. Things like DEI are more important than upholding the law. I wanted to ask you if there are stats on increased crime with all of the, illegal and unsustainable immigration quotas that the government has pushed through, saying that it's also helpful for society when it's really stressed all of our essential services. And it's caused, a lot of our youth massive unemployment because they've been incentivizing foreign temporary workers. And I just wanted to ask you if you have the stats on some of that, because also people aren't the police officers I've talked to while campaigning feel they're not able to uphold the law. If a new immigrant commits a crime, they have a kind of an extra advantage and a get out of jail pass because, we don't want to appear racist or anti-immigrant, and so we'll just let you off. And so unfortunately, the law is not being upheld in any capacity. So we have so many problems because of this politicization of our police force, and really just getting the police officers back on track to do their job. Most of them want to, could really improve this country. What's your thoughts?
Well, statistically, I'm not going to spill out numbers right now, but I have looked at the numbers about 2 or 3 months ago. I was reviewing all the crime stats, probably over the last 25 years since 2000. And I have to say that our crime is actually down from what it was in around 2008, 2010. We seem to have reached a peak in crime. And since then, the crime numbers have come down. Now, whether they're up over the last 2 years or not, I would suspect that the numbers are going up slightly from what they were 3 or 4 years ago. But our big peak was in around 2010. And what we are noticing, you've brought up the issue, isn't so much the crime, it's the manner in which prosecution is taking place. So I was one of several members. I sit on a board of a organization that was created in the last year called the Grus Justice Project, and that has a lot to do with the case of Detective Helen Grus of Ottawa Police Service, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. But one thing that the Grus Justice Project has really formed based upon is this issue of the rule of law, and how the rule of law, in that we are all to be treated equally under the law. Everybody's treated equally under the law. The senators, the members of parliament, and the civilians of this country should all be treated equally under the law. But what became extremely evident since the Justin Trudeau Liberals took power, and I'm not advocating for or dissing any of our political groups. I would sort of treat them all very much similar at this point in terms of how we need to look at them, again, being equal under the law. But one of the things that was very noticeable is Justin Trudeau's dealing with Jody Wilson-Raybould, who at the time was the Attorney General. And it all centered around the SNC-Lavalin case. And I think that was around 2017, 2018, right about then. And what had happened was Jody Wilson-Raybould was convinced, as the Attorney General of Canada, that SNC-Lavalin had committed crime and was going to pay the price for the crime that it committed. And the trial was before the court, and a lot of political interference got involved, and the Prime Minister wasn't getting the answer from the Attorney General that he wanted. So he extracted the Attorney General from that position. And that is clearly an obstruction of justice. That is a criminal offense. And that was extremely evident to anyone in the policing community that the Prime Minister just committed a crime when he did that. The RCMP to date have not been able to explain why he wasn't properly investigated and why that particular crime was not properly investigated. But as time went on, and as we entered our COVID era, we saw more and more examples of the obstruction of justice and how one group in society is treated and another group in society is treated differently, whether that's immigrants, new immigrants coming into the country, whether that's how people of certain races or religions are treated differently in this country. But clearly, people in this country are not treated equally. And we have even seen that by how anyone who has spoken out against government action, the manner in which they are prosecuted, the manner in which even when they win their cases, the government prosecution steps in and appeals those cases, which is something that's never happened before. We've never seen this type of behavior before. So what we're seeing now is a fragmentation of society. In one group that sides with the government gets treated one way, and another group that pushes back against the government or says things that are contrary to the dominant narrative gets treated a completely different way in the eyes of the court. So in the Grus Justice Project, our tagline is restoring the rule of law. And to restore the rule of law, the autonomy and the independence of police officers so that they can conduct investigations free from political interference. The Grus Justice Project is dedicated to protecting every Canadian's right to honest policing and to fair justice, ensuring that police investigations are guided by truth and evidence rather than political agendas, which is what's quite obvious at this point.
Can you give the audience just a little bit of a thumbnail or a Reader's Digest version of what happened with Helen Grus? Probably at least 50% might be aware, but for those who aren't, can you explain how she's being persecuted for her excellent work?
Okay, so back in 2020, when the vaccine mandates were coming out, Detective Grus was concerned about that, and she became aware of data from Pfizer. Pfizer's documents that were released, I think, in early 2021. She became aware of data from Pfizer. It was documents that were ordered to be released on side effects, potential side effects. And there was a Pfizer study that had taken place involving hundreds of pregnant women. And the report only listed the results. These are hundreds of women that were vaccinated while pregnant. And the study indicated the results of 33 of the pregnant women. And in a court process in the US, they could not explain what happened to all the other pregnant mothers in the case. And this was deemed something of concern that needed to be looked into. But the question was, so what happened to the 33 mothers that we know the results of? And 32 of the 33 mothers that they know the results of had miscarriages.
Oh my God, it's so evil, isn't it?
So Detective Grus was aware of this information, and she became aware of this information at the same time. She is a SACA officer, which means she works in the sexual assault child abuse unit. She specializes in investigating sexual assaults and child abuse. Anytime an infant dies, that's her job. She works in that unit. And what had happened was she became aware through conversations in the SACA unit that there was a spike that had just recently occurred, because they're informed by hospitals anytime infants die. So they were aware of a spike that was up to 300% increase in spontaneous death of infants after birth. And so she started having conversations with some of her colleagues about this spike in deaths. And she became aware of the Pfizer document study that I had just mentioned. And she actually, during a chief's meeting, prior to the meeting, she accessed the computer database to see if there were any new deaths that occurred and to confirm the numbers, just so that when she meets the chief that evening, she's properly informed and she has the proper data to provide to the chief. And this is Chief Slowly, by the way. This took place a few months prior to the Freedom Convoy happening. And she provided Chief Slowly with this troubling information. And he was concerned at the time. And as time went on, she started asking her colleagues certain questions. She wasn't conducting an investigation. She was in what would be known as the probative phase. She's asking questions. She's concerned. Mm-hmm. She's got some information and she's just asking questions. Okay, so she's not conducting an investigation. She's just asking questions because she wants to know, is this something that's happening in our area? Is this possibly connected to the fact that mothers had been vaccinated or not? Mm-hmm. When infants die, it's standard protocol for investigating officers to complete a medical form on the infant, including, the mother's vaccination status, on any new medical products that the mother, caregiving mother, may have taken. And in some of the cases she noticed when she was looking at these infant deaths, those forms had not been completed by the officer prior to the officer closing off the case as death unknown, cause unknown. So as she started asking more questions, her supervisor ordered her not to ask any more questions relative to COVID-19 vaccination, and that was an order. Eventually, somebody from the Ottawa Police Service had contacted the CBC and provided information to the CBC about Detective Grus asking questions. Oh. Nobody from the Ottawa Police Service investigated who leaked that information to the CBC. But because the CBC started asking questions, the Ottawa Police Service deemed Detective Grus's behavior to be discreditable because it's now bringing discredit to the Ottawa Police Service. And I have to say that what she was asking questions about was not discreditable. It was the fact that Ottawa Police Service pulled her off asking those questions, suspended her, and in fact then shut down any potential for investigating vaccination status as a cause of infant death. And then they charged her. But before they charged her, they wiretapped her without obtaining a warrant. They harassed her, and they eventually charged her, put her through the process. Her police association refused to pick up the legal costs associated with defending her. They have had officers in the past commit serious criminal offenses that they had defended. But in this case, an officer asking questions about why babies are dying resulted in the Ottawa Police Association not covering her legal expenses.
So unbelievable.
Try to wrap your head around just how
So
bizarre.
disgraceful. It's disgusting. Yeah.
So this disciplinary trial, it's a disciplinary proceeding, has been going on now for 4 years, and it is still continuing.
Is she working now?
What's that?
Is she back to work, or how
Yes.
does she? Okay.
Yes, she is working. So what has happened is that Detective Grus is working, but so she was convicted back in the late summer. I believe it was September. She was convicted, and
Of what? Mischief? Or what was she convicted of?
discreditable conduct.
Okay.
So she was found guilty. She did have 6 expert witnesses that were going to testify on her behalf that her concerns and her questions were valid, and that there was overwhelming evidence to indicate her concerns were valid, because in fact, this was something. It was a real thing that was taking place. Now, upon her conviction, the tribunal's written decision, as part of this long 30 some odd page written decision by the hearing officer, the tribunal's written decision stated that Detective Grus was convicted for not asking permission to investigate the potential crime of criminal negligence. First of all, she never said that criminal negligence is a potential crime and I'm investigating this. So there's an error in the statement made by the tribunal that she's convicted for not asking permission to investigate the potential crime of criminal negligence. And the reason is because her investigation had political and societal ramifications where the suspects were public officials. And that's written right in the decision. You're investigating public officials. First of all, she's not investigating. She's just asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually identified it as potential criminal negligence.
Wow.
And since then, since this investigation has taken place, which started in 2022, the investigation, since that had taken place last year, 2024, the Comprehensive Ontario Police Services Act that had been changed included 2 changes in the Ontario Police Services Act. One of them is that police officers in Ontario can now not investigate criminal offenses unless they have permission from their supervisors first. And the second part is that they have now created a new position in Ontario called the Inspector General of Policing. Why did they do that? Why did they decide it was necessary to create a position called Inspector General of Policing. Well, if you look at the definition, it essentially says that, well, the Inspector General has the authority to remove any police chief from their position if they're not doing their job satisfactorily. Well, why would that be an issue? Why would that require an Inspector General of Policing to do that? This isn't making a lot of sense. Oh, there's an exemption in there, and the exemption is this does not apply to the Ontario Provincial Police, but it applies to all the municipal police services in Ontario. Well, why would they do that? Well, I have a reason. I have an example of what I think would be a reason why they did that. Back in 2021, when we went through our second series of lockdowns, we went through our first series of lockdowns in late 2020, just right around New Year's Eve. Ontario went into its first lockdown. And when it went into its first lockdown, we knew about it because of social media. And the Ontario Chiefs of Police Association had put out the first tweet on social media saying that we have been asked, essentially, that policing services have been asked to initiate lockdowns on behalf of the government. And the government's talking about, you can't leave your home without your papers. Everybody's got to be locked in. And the Ontario Chiefs of Police said, no, that's going too far. We're not going to do that. Just letting you know, they want to do this, but it's not going to happen. This is a broad overreach of your.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay, not going to do it. And it didn't surprise me that it came out from the Ontario Chiefs of Police. What that means is all the chiefs got together, including the commissioner of the OPP. They got together and they somehow got together in a conference or in a room, and they said, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? And they unanimously agreed that this is a bad idea. We're not.
Good. Well, that's something positive that they.
Right. It was until April of 2021. And in April of 2021, the government is announcing they're going into another series of lockdowns. And the first social media tweet that came out not from the Ontario Chiefs of Police Association. Why? Well, it would have to be a unanimous decision for the Ontario Chiefs of Police to put out a social media post on behalf of all police services. So they didn't do that. Who posted first on social media? Well, that would have been the Ontario Provincial Police. Commissioner Thomas Carrick from the Ontario Provincial Police. The OPP put out a post saying that the province wants them to enforce lockdown measures, check for your papers if you're out of your home without permission, and we are gladly going to do that.
Oh, wow. And that's just in a few months.
Right. Except right after that post came a whole series of posts from all the other or most other municipal services that said, no, we are not going to do that. That created a real problem, didn't it? Because the OPP agreed to lockdown. That's the head of the OPP, agreed to locking down the public in their homes and charging them if they dare leave their homes without written authorization. Where the other police services said, that's a really bad idea. We're not going to do that. That's just nonsense. So within 48 hours, the Solicitor General who oversees policing said, what is she supposed to do? So she backed down and said, forget about it. Just let it go. We're not going to enforce these lockdown measures because they couldn't, because the police chiefs were refusing. Well, they don't want that to happen in the future. In the future, they want police chiefs to know that if you don't follow our directives that we put out, you don't get to make up your own mind. You don't get to have a say. You don't get to have an ethical or moral interjection about how bad this decision would be. we need you to follow orders. So guess what? If we have an inspector general position,
Mm.
his position will be to go to your station, relieve you of your command, and assign someone else to follow the orders that they've been given. So, Ontarians need to understand that as much as that was a victory, and there were many police chiefs that stood up for the civilians and said that's just a crazy idea, that's not going to happen in the future based on these new changes that have come about.
But is there not enough police officers that have sort of, to use the broad term, woken up that maybe will not, that have that personal moral integrity now to say, you know what, I'm not doing that? I mean, a lot of people I've talked to, a lot of police officers, even, not only at the Freedom Convoy, but, over the last few years, who are realizing that these mandates and everything else has gone down a very slippery slope to government authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and that I actually have a moral duty just to say no. What's your sense on that?
Not a chance. Not a chance. There are far too many officers that, and let's face it, they're all in different age categories, and their position in life varies. So you could be a new officer who just got married, has young children, just purchased a home, you have a mortgage, you have car payments, whatever it is, and you're not about to give that up by saying no. You could also be someone who is 2, 3, 5 years away from retirement, and you're looking forward to your pension, and you don't want to make any waves. So you don't want to say no. So you just go along with it, because that's what, in fact, actually happened. That's exactly what happened. And I would like to give credit where credit is due. And I do. And I give credit to a number of police officers who did stand up. But if I were to tell you that number of officers who actually stood up and who spoke out and said, this is wrong, that number represents less than 0.001%.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That, and that I suspect, although I don't have the data, that number is probably similar in most fields: medical, education, legal, etc. I was shocked in my field. I work in HR consulting, and when the mandates came, I felt very called, like Helen, and I spoke out, and I told all my clients they should not be enforcing these mandates with an experimental product that has a lot of serious data on harm, and it's against informed consent, and all of them just basically immediately dropped our company as a service. But now, years later, legal firms that were defending the companies are seeing the cash cow on injured victims, and now they've just totally switched. Nobody's noticing, and they're supporting the people who want to sue their employer for forcing them to take an experimental shot. So, it's a statement on morality and society as a whole, that we don't have that, strong calling to stand up, and the lack of courage, plus being overly burdened with debt as well, has stopped some people. But that low number, imagine if even 5% spoke out, the difference. There would have been none of this in all these fields. If doctors spoke out, if educators are speaking out against the sexualization and grooming of our children, but they don't. So this is troubling. I would hope that after all these years that there would be more people who would just say no more.
Unfortunately not. And I don't see that number changing. So there are upsides to what we've been dealing with and what we're continuing to deal with. One of them is the National Citizens Inquiry. So if anybody doesn't know about the National Citizens Inquiry, I highly recommend that you inform yourself. I was requested this year to become a commissioner for the National Citizens Inquiry, and I did take up that position. And I attended 2 hearings in 2025, and I'm planning to be at a hearing that may be scheduled in April or May of 2026, may be the next date of hearings. The National Citizens Inquiry is a citizens-led, citizens-funding inquiry that travels across Canada to take testimony of people who have information to provide under oath. And it's currently the largest repository of testimony that has ever been done.
In Canada or worldwide?
Worldwide.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. It's so moving. I was very honored to be asked to testify in the recent Brandon, Manitoba session on Are Our Children Safe? I had a very powerful story with my own children, sad story. And I agree with you that people need to take time to listen to these witness testimonies. They're very powerful. And, what has been done is so wrong that I personally believe it cannot be swept under the carpet. We cannot move on. There must be accountability for people to grow and learn.
Absolutely. So I'm also a board member of the Grus Justice Project that was formed probably about 7 months ago when we formed the Grus Justice Project. And I have to say that the exciting portion of the Grus Justice Project is to bring this information to light, because the story of Detective Helen Grus is so important in Canada right now, because it takes the medical information, the truthful, I just want to know the truth, as in her own words, she just wants to know the truth, and how a police officer in Canada who's tasked with investigating infant deaths is pulled away from asking questions as to why these infants were dying. The questions, first of all, there were no questions asked once she was shut down. There was no investigation that was conducted. The message sent to the policing community was, if you think you're going to ask questions about this relative to the vaccine distribution, this is going to happen to you. Wow. This is how we're going to treat you. So nobody looked into it. Nobody asked questions. When the outpour of information, of objective data coming out now over time has only solidified the truth and what the truth is, and that she was on the right track for asking these questions. What does not get answered is, first of all, prior to her testimony, on the day that she was scheduled to testify, she received an email from the inspector from their Professional Standards Bureau. That is the person who had charged her, the person who is responsible for disciplinary hearings. And she received an email threatening to charge her with additional offenses if she testified and used certain words or terminology in her testimony.
Wow.
That in itself is an obstruction of justice and witness tampering. That inspector eventually, over a few week period, resigned from the police service and went on into private practice and law. Mm-hmm. I believe that the choice was to resign or that he would have been charged criminally.
Wow.
Why would he do that? Why? What was so compelling to tell an officer to shut up and not talk about anything to do with infant deaths? So when you look at this, I mean, this is the makings of a pure evil Hollywood film.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't get worse than this. So what we have done is decided that we have dug deep into who is involved, who said what, who ordered what conversations were taking place. And we have decided to assist in funding and facilitating the production of a documentary film called
Good. I was going to ask you about that, because that can be quite powerful.
Right. It will be incredibly powerful. So if your audience is capable then I highly suggest you navigate your way to grusjusticeproject.org/donate and consider making a donation towards the production of this fantastic documentary. On the homepage of the Grus Justice Project, there is a trailer video that is already out there. It's a new revision, and you'll get to see what we're talking about and just how deep we're going to go and how much we're going to unpack in the corruption between police services, politics, and the health industry.
Oh, excellent. I personally will make a donation to you. It's been many years I've been awake to the medical fraud, corruption, and quite frankly, pure evil. So this is a wonderful thing to get off the ground. If everyone can donate, $20, $50, that would be probably enormously helpful. So, if you don't feel called to speak out, then help those who have spoken out and, give generously. This will be an excellent documentary that I look forward to seeing. So excellent work there. Again, Grus, GRUS Justice, JUSTIC project.org/donate. And please go there. Don't forget, don't put it off, donate to help this documentary get off the ground. Well, this has been really, really fantastic talking to you, Vincent. Is there anything else you wanted to mention to the audience that we missed in our discussion? I know we covered a lot of ground, and most impressed, obviously, your work to shine a light on the incredible work that Constable Helen Grus was doing, and the incredible punishment she received.
Well, I think something that I'd like to maybe get through to your audience is that it's quite evident that a lot of people are feeling quite burned out, because what we've experienced in our news cycles over the last 5 years is a lot to have to bear and go through when we understand the severity of what's happening to our nation in all of the problems that we are facing. There's no question this is not organic or natural in occurrence. This is something by design. But I'm going to ask you to, take a deep breath and take that well-deserved vacation or relaxing period that you require and get back in the game. And one of the best ways that you can do it is we need you to transmit your words. We need you to communicate the truth. And in order to communicate the truth, you need to be sure that what you are saying is true. So I've discovered this years ago, that if you make a comment on social media or you make a comment in conversation that you're questioned about, be prepared to back it up. Know your data, know your information, stick to your lane, stay in your lane on what you want to get passionate about. If it's the Detective Helen Grus case, then read everything you can about it, go to the website and understand it fully, so that when you engage in conversation, you're really, really good in your game. As an example, this case that I brought up at the beginning of the podcast, where somebody tries to slander you in a certain way, and you welcome them to engage in the conversation. Let's have that conversation. Let's continue to have these conversations, and one conversation at a time will wake up our communities, bring information to the attention of those in law enforcement, those in the health community. Do not shy away from having these conversations.
Excellent. Well, what a great way to finish. I totally concur with you, and have been doing the same and advocating the same. You can't get angry. It just doesn't work. You have to just stay calm, keep informing, have good information, and share frequently and keep repeating. Well, thank you very much. It's been great to speak with you, and hopefully we'll see that documentary sometime soon. So thank you so much for everything you're doing, Vincent, and hopefully we'll talk to you sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much.